So for me, I was born and raised during the war on drugs in the 80s, in South Central Los Angeles. And unbeknownst to me at the time, there were two laws that were, passed during the 80s and the 90s. One was the crime bill. The other one was the 1997 Adoptions and Safe Families Act. One bill incarcerated all of the adults in my community. The other bill incarcerated the children into foster homes. And so it broke apart communities where I grew up in, and I didn't understand why at that time until I got older and understood, how it ravaged my community. Why did it affect me so deeply, and why did I end up, in the carceral system in the first place? Laws impacted us. People not, seeing us as human beings impacted me. Me being looked at as a throwaway child in the community because of, who my parents were perceived impacted my, me over, a span of time. Not being served adequately because I grew up in such a ravaged neighborhood impacted me, services, stuff like that. And so this series is so important because it's deep. Those laws cut deep, and we are seeing the effects of it when we go and we look in our neighborhoods right now. We see the effects of what happened in the 80s and the 90s. And it's important that us as seeds who grew up during that time address that and advocate for solutions to that so that we don't keep seeing our neighborhoods continuously be ravaged.
Thank you. So, the way mass incarceration has impacted my life, I would say that growing up where I grew up, I saw what divestment looked like. It didn't matter which system I had to interact with. I saw that we were being treated differently, that we were getting less than, that we were being, in many ways, not viewed as human beings. It wasn't until later in my life where I began to be exposed to other people and other people's experiences that I understood that there was this very clear way of justifying divestment, indifference, disregard, targeting in a negative way our communities, and how that perpetuated from one generation to the next. For me, it has meant, being overexposed to gun violence and seeing that all around my community. It has meant that there has been a failure to acknowledge that folks from our communities are human beings that should be invested in, right? That should be cared for, loved, that should have the opportunity to access support to be able to grow. The differences between communities that are not supported and those that are is literally investment. The human experience is one that's challenging regardless of race and ethnicity. But what we see is access to support, access to investment, access to just an acknowledgement that as a human being I can make mistakes, means that some people are going to be locked into a cycle of never being able to climb out of a hole that has been dug, and how many different systems are involved in that hole, right? And then you have folks who are able to access because they've been invested in, their communities have been invested in, their schools have been invested in, they have access to healthcare, they have access to mental health. They're able to just thrive, whereas we're stuck in this cycle of survival. This series is important because sharing and acknowledging the different ways in which laws, policies, practices, and investments contribute to marginalization is something that needs to be explored, addressed, and talked about. And the way that we do that is really by just acknowledging those experiences and the impact of those policies. That lifting that shame is really important, in acknowledging all the different ways in which systems have let us down. And with that, then we could start, working on the changes that we collectively work together to advance.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you. It's amazing to see your beautiful faces. Thank you to those who are streaming in from YouTube and Facebook. We are glad that you all can make it this evening to hear this phenomenal discussion. It is bound to open your mind in different ways, and I hope that you're able to receive whatever that you're looking for and more. I want to start off by introducing the Impact of Mass Incarceration series, why we chose to do it this week, this month, and why we even chose to launch the Impact with specifically focusing on mass incarceration. The Impact of Mass Incarceration is a call home to victims of the criminal justice system who have been taken from their communities and brought back years later to an unrecognizable place without the proper reentry tools. This series also aims to serve as a voice for those who are currently incarcerated and are deliberately silenced. In 2019, the Barrett Institute provided data that more than 10 million arrests are made each year in the United States, with an arrest made every 3 seconds. Within this statistic, fewer than 5% of these are for serious violent crimes. Busboys and Boys strives to inform the public of why criminal justice reform is necessary, as well as provide a platform for those with a criminal record and allies in this fight to end mass incarceration. We also hope to provide victims the proper welcoming back home that they deserve. We decided to highlight mass incarceration and prisoner justice awareness during this week because we discovered that Prisoner Justice Day is a solidarity movement that takes place annually on August 10th. The movement began in Canada in 1974 in support of prisoners' rights and to remember all the people who have died of unnatural deaths while incarcerated. And when this movement began, it was customary for those who were incarcerated to take a moment of silence or even be silent throughout the entire day in honor of those who died of unnatural deaths while incarcerated. So if you do remember on August 10th to take a moment of silence, please do it as to join in this movement. Now I get the honor of introducing our beautiful speakers this evening. I had the joy of meeting Ingrid about 2 months ago for an event called In Their Names. Ingrid's story is within it, and also the work that the Alliance for Safety and Justice is also within this book and how they're able to bring victims' rights to life. Ingrid Archie serves as the Organizing Director of TimeDone, a program of Alliance for Safety and Justice that creates societal change by removing barriers from prior convictions. Since 2016, Ingrid has led voter registration, education, and civic engagement efforts within LA's African American and lower income communities inside LA County jails. Ingrid was born and raised in Los Angeles and is a mother of 6. As a young child, Ingrid's exposure to extreme violence in her home paved a direct pathway to the foster care system. Her attempts to cope with physical and emotional trauma were criminalized, and Ingrid spent most of her young life behind bars, revolving in and out of juvenile detention centers and later prison. Ingrid has a strong background in working closely with community leaders, activists, volunteers, in efforts to organize grassroots campaigns and mobilize resources for impactful projects. Her deep understanding of the needs and challenges faced by marginalized communities has driven her to work tirelessly towards creating meaningful change. Next, we have Shakyra Diaz, who is a strategist with extensive public policy and organizing experience grounded in authentic coalition building. Shakyra Diaz is the Alliance for Safety and Justice's Chief of Federal Advocacy, where she advocates for federal investments in safety solutions supported by communities most impacted by harm. She previously served as the Chief of Staff, Ohio Director, Managing Director of Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, and Managing Director of Partnerships. During her time at ASJ, Shakyra has provided leadership for several advocacy campaigns, resulting in criminal justice reforms, ending long-standing barriers to services for people with past convictions, and the establishment of trauma recovery centers to help underserved crime survivors heal across the country. Shakyra was born in the Dominican Republic and was raised in Cleveland, Ohio. She is a graduate of Case Western Reserve University and East High School. She now lives in the Cleveland area with her family. And without further ado, please join me in a round of applause for our amazing speakers. Virtually, please give us a round of applause, and I look forward to having this conversation.
We've been on Earth, and we don't get a chance to spend more time together. So we're going to say it. All right. Okay. So we are going to basically just interview each other. So that's how we want to do this. So join us as we interview each Ingrid, we often talk about mass incarceration and criminalization, and I'm adding criminalization because over approximately about 78 million people have criminal convictions, the majority of which have never been imprisoned. We have to be mindful that taking a plea and being there are several ways in which someone could be under correctional control without ever being in prison. That doesn't mean that you will not have a felony conviction and everything associated with that, which is dissolution of many of the rights that all human beings should have. So when we talk about mass incarceration and criminalization, often we talk about the impact on adults. Tell us a little bit about the impact of mass incarceration and criminalization on children.
So, I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, gang-infested, drug-infested community, and, my parents succumbed to that. A lot of people would say, oh, well, your parents had a problem with drugs, but they wasn't enemies with drugs, you know what I'm saying? It was, for some of us, it was a source of income. For some people, it was a way to cope, and because they didn't have other means of being able to cope with different societal issues at that time, drugs was it, whether it put food on the table or whether it masked whatever emotion that was going on. And so because, my mother was, addicted to drugs and my dad was in the streets selling drugs, my mom, she kind of, she didn't understand how to cope with having kids and being addicted to drugs. And so, essentially I ended up in the system, in the foster care system at the age of 7. Instead of people asking me, what do you need? You know what I'm saying? It was kind of like, we're sending you to this home. And yeah, I was 7 years old, but I was able to talk and they was able to ask me questions around what happened. And they wrote it all down, but they never asked me questions around what do I think I need or what do I think will make me be okay. Because I was okay enough to tell them what happened, but they didn't feel like I was okay enough to know what I needed as a kid. But I did. And so, instead of them again asking me, what did I need or how can they help or, what would be helpful for me at that age, I was placed into foster care with strangers, and my parents were criminalized, instead of giving them help and saying, okay, we want to help this family, be together. My dad, he couldn't get me because he had a drug charge. My mom went to jail because she was addicted to drugs, not because she did anything really wrong, but because she was reacting to her being chemically dependent. And so instead of helping, they broke the family apart and incarcerated, my parents in different systems and incarcerated me into a system. And they criminalized all 3 of us because every time as I got older, when I acted out because I wasn't with my parents, they sent me to jail instead of looking at the fact that this child, grew up in a really tough situation. It probably wasn't like these circumstances, let's help her. But no, they decided to put cuffs around my wrist and put me in a padded room and try to feed me drugs to say this is how we're going to help you. Now, I think about 50 miles away, they probably wouldn't have did that to the same kid. They probably would have wrapped their arms around that kid. But because my skin color wasn't like me, I didn't get that type of treatment. I'm a big girl candidate today. And so, basically the system, telling me that we're going to respond to your trauma with systems and not with care, it made me think, well, what the hell, it don't matter. So I'm going to just do what I do and I'm going to react how I'm going to react because I don't feel that I don't feel that I'm worthy enough, you know what I'm saying, or deserving of anything other than handcuffs because of how people responded to me. So I responded to society in the same ways in which I was responding to. Wow. So, as we talk about trauma, right? Discuss unaddressed trauma and how circumstances facing people hurt by crime and violence and people committing crime and violence are so overlapping as to be virtually indistinguishable. And that stark similarity should radically change how we fight crime. Can you describe what those similarities are and how this should change how we fight crime?
I would say that the similarities are rooted and lie in the indifference and failure to acknowledge the humanity. Whether we are can identify as a victim of crime, which is very challenging in communities that are vulnerable. We are often forced to identify as folks who are just living in survival mode, right? So that acknowledgement of our victimization of the harm that has happened to us doesn't happen to many of us, right? It took me doing this work to realize I was a victim of crime several times over, right? I experienced childhood sexual abuse. I have been sexually assaulted. I was stalked. I lost my first friend that I lost to gun violence. I was 14 years old. I stopped counting when that number got to 40, right? So, but I didn't realize that makes me a victim of crime. I didn't understand, but do understand that relationship that exists between not acknowledging someone's harm and hurt, right? And not supporting someone's harm and hurt, but then being punitive when they are dealing with that harm and hurt. Unabused trauma looks like symptoms that can arise in addiction. It can look like mental health. It can look like interruption of employment or housing. It can look like re-victimization. It can look like contact with the justice system, right? So oftentimes what happens is that the very communities who experience a great deal of harm and violence are also experiencing a great deal of disregard. On the other side, on the coping side, however folks are able to cope because the resources are not there are often considered criminal. And as a result, the system then comes down, ignores the humanity, but is very punitive in its response. So I'm completely invisible when I need help. But you see me, because you're looking for me. You see me when I've done something that you consider to be criminal. So there's a relationship there that exists, which is, I think, why our work is so impactful. There's a recognition that there's a great deal of overlap between people who have experienced harm and people who are coming in contact with the justice system. We have been trained to believe that these are two very distinct and different populations. In reality, that's not the case. There's a great deal of overlap there. So, as we consider like the negative societal impact of mass incarceration and criminalization, can you tell us a little bit about why mass criminalization and incarceration hurts victims of crime? Elaborate about how this way of doing things, the way we have been doing this for at least 40 plus years, how is that hurting victims of crime?
So it's the response, again, in poor communities where there's not a deep investment or investment at all in terms of care, when it comes to people who are chemically addicted, homeless, who have been impacted by violence themselves, they feel like instead of, because you're not worthy people, we're going to respond, instead of care, to put you in cuffs and put you in a box, because it's easier to box somebody's problem, and lock that door, not understanding that those problems become exacerbated because now it's all over the walls, you know what I'm saying? And, it don't matter because all I have to do as a person in these systems is walk past that door and make sure you're accounted for so that you continuously feed into this 187 billion dollar industry that I work for. You feel me? They spend 187 billion dollars to incarcerate people, and most of the people who are being incarcerated have been harmed first and committed the crime as a result of the harm that probably was perpetuated on them, so on and so forth, right? But let's go back to the $187 billion. Now, for me, I went in and out of, prison institutions. I was in and out of, what do you call it, juvenile halls and stuff like that. And this happened over a span of 20-something years. So me, with all of the trauma that has been layered on top of the trauma that I walked into that box with, I came to my community, to a community-based organization that instead welcomed me with open arms instead of some silver, bracelets. And they asked me, what is it that you need? And I was like, I didn't even know how to answer the question because everything was all over the place. My kids were in the system, I didn't know what I was going to do because I didn't have a place to stay. I just knew that I didn't want to go back to the box because the box wasn't helping all of the trauma that was inside of me that I needed to figure out a way to cope with. So I had to keep going back to this box, right? And so, I went to therapy. I went to a lot of different groups. I started getting involved with advocacy. I think I stayed there for about 2 years. It cost about $80,000, probably less than that, maybe 60 or 40. But these 2 years, matched with 20. It took 20 years, and I was coming out on probation. These are billion-dollar systems that they build to supposedly, address public safety. But a community-based organization that don't even have a budget to match that helped me get off of probation after I had spent, 20-something years in and out of the system on probation. I went to a community-based organization called A New Way of Life. And it took only a couple $1,000s just to address my trauma and to redirect all of that hurt and pain into advocacy. And so we thinking that, okay, we want to throw all this money into locking people up when we're not, it's not a proper investment. You can invest in human beings and giving them what they need because care is what they need and not continual harm. Harm is when you locking up somebody's trauma.
Yeah.
That is not the doctor of trauma. You know what I'm saying? Care is. Licensed therapist is. Even in our communities, it's like, it's a faux pas. They don't need, I guess we do, we human too. It's because we don't look like everybody else and we don't act like everybody else. We bleed the same at the end of the day.
So good.
All right.
So good.
Shakyra, what were your specific personal or professional experiences that led you into advocacy?
So that is very layered. I feel like I've had so many different experiences.
Don't be modest. Don't be modest. Give it to us.
I've had so many different life experiences where I observed, I was that kid that asked a lot of questions that annoys everybody. That was me. I remember one time I asked my mom, how many grains of sand are there in the world? And she was like, I don't know, ask God. I was like, give me an address. Because I need a letter returned to me with the answer. So I was that kid, but I was very observant. So it has taken me like a long time to really realize how each one of those impactful moments was like a different type of awakening that brought me to this work. At the age of 8, like you, I was in foster care. At the age of 8, I had to make an adult decision because we were in public housing and had nowhere else to go. at the age of 14, I lost one of my closest friends to gun violence. I had the great fortune of graduating from my high school and then going back to work at my old high school, where I was able to work with my friends, you know, those sisters and brothers and cousins, nieces and nephews. But there was a difference between the time that I graduated and the time that I went back to work at my high school. And my high school was a very rough high school, and you know, Cleveland is one of those cities that is often competing with, you know, New Orleans, Oakland, or Detroit for negative outcomes, right? And but in that time that, you know, I went to college and went back to work in my old high school, I saw a difference. When I was in high school, while there was a great deal of, you know, violence happening, right, within the community, sometimes in the school, there was soap and toilet paper in the bathroom. Well, when I went back to work at my old high school, that wasn't there, right? My French book was 30 years old when I had it. My students, one of my students actually had my French book, right? We had, even though there wasn't any soap in the bathrooms, right, there were metal detectors. So for me, that just led to more questions, and it led to me wanting to understand why, where's the money going? My students are working really hard, families are, you know, love their children. Where is it, what's happening? So I started doing policy work and just started to just see differences, and started doing research and unpacking, and started engaging in different campaigns. And my very first campaign was one where there was a practice in the city of Cleveland where if you were arrested within the city limits and you had paraphernalia, you were charged with felony drug possession instead of misdemeanor paraphernalia. And the reason that happened is because they would take the paraphernalia and test it for drug residue and choose to charge people under the state code, which meant a felony conviction. So only people from the city of Cleveland were going to prison for a misdemeanor. Essentially, they was overcharged. And the majority of those folks were African American. So that campaign for me was an eye-opener in realizing how words matter, how laws matter, how indifference matters, because there were so exactly. How there were so many people who worked as part of the system who were like, oh yeah, that's just the way it is. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? Which led to a bunch of other campaigns and other efforts. But the thread through all of them was this recognition that I could be any one of these people. My daughter could be any one of these people. My sister could be any one of these people. So it was a recognition that so many systems consider and have designated entire communities throwaways, right? So for me has been, in doing the work that we do, it has been, and I often say this, we are human beings. No human being should ever feel like they have to audition for humanity. We're human beings, that's it, right? But the way that systems operate is as if you have to be superhuman in order to get some recognition, in order to be seen, in order for your harm to be acknowledged, in order for you to get some support, right? But entire communities are experiencing that in so many different ways, whether that is separating families, whether that is overcharging, whether that is, you know, this practice, and it wasn't always this way, that every single system does background checks for everything. Imagine what it would look like if systems, every single system that had to interact with human beings, would ask, what do you need? What kind of support would help you get from A to B? Where are you at today, and what does B look like for you? And we could do it systemically, because somehow we systemically have asked, do you have a criminal conviction? and have all these prohibitions tied to it that include not getting access to SNAP benefits, that include, access to education, include access to housing, include access to everything that you need to have stability in your life, right? If we were asking people questions to help stabilize communities, what could things look like? But we're not, right? Because what has happened, and it has been enshrined in laws, in policies, in practices, and investments, that there's entire communities that are not considered human beings, but we are. So you are an amazing advocate. In many ways, you have found a voice in your advocacy. Tell us a little bit about some of the laws that were impacted, that impacted your life. Particularly like some of the laws that were advocated for within our organization, who you're now a tremendous leader in.
So my last stint in prison was 2015, and I got out on a law called, because of the law called Prop 47. And Prop 47 lowers 5, crimes that usually fills up the jails, right? So crimes like simple possession, crimes like theft, receiving stolen property, writing bad checks. What's the last one? Can't remember, okay. But regardless, these are crimes that make the population in California jails extremely high. It's easy to arrest. It's easy, to charge you with a felony. Say, for instance, before Prop 47 passed, I had stolen some items out of a store worth $450. I was charged with a felony theft case, and it sent me to prison, right? Now, because of Prop 47, another instance is somebody had a $5 crack rock that was in jail with me. They went to prison for 6 years because it was their third time for having or possessing, not even selling it, just possessing and using, crack rock. Before, I had got, the thing about it is that the jails were filled, with people with lower level crimes. So to address that, Prop 47 was passed, and I was in jail during the campaign. I didn't even know, none of this was going on. I just wanted to go home. And in the back of my head, I'm like, you can't keep coming here, you know what I'm saying? And like, what does the end look like, and what does a second chance look like for you? Like, this was a question that I asked myself, and I'm like, I'm never turning back. Like, it was just a no-brainer. I didn't have no big intricate plan. It was just, I'm never turning back. And so I went to prison, and I looked at, someone else's prison sheet, because we get these sheets that let you know how much time you sit in there. And we had the same charge, but her charge got dismissed, and she was going home. I said, hey, I got that same charge. Why am I going home? And she was like, so I went to the counselor, and I asked the counselor, like, is this law called Prop 47, and I think I qualify for it. Can you check? She said, you don't qualify for it because it's only for lifers. I said, okay. Now I'm going to say this. It is not beneficial when you don't know what you're talking about and you're talking to somebody who can benefit from it. It's problematic. Okay, let me get back to the story. So, 3 months later, I went back to my monk. Actually, I went to the cop shop in prison, and I went and got an energy envelope and 2 sheets of paper with 2 envelopes because I didn't have any money on my books. And I said, listen, the best thing that they can tell me is no, but I'm going to try anyway. And so I did it, and 3 months later, I went back to that same, counselor in prison on the same yard, and she was like, you're going home. Your sentence has been cut in half. I said, oh, why? She said, because of Prop 47. I said, oh, I thought, good. I'm into a new way of life. And Susan, you know, she was like, I think Susan Burton is a founder of the New Way of Life Reentry Project in Los Angeles. She's an amazing woman. She has homes all over the place. And she is, you know, I accredit like my leadership to her, because without her, I would not be able to sit into this chair. So if you watching Susan, hey girl, hey. And so, you know, I went to a new way of life, and she was like, I'm going to this, you know, a lot was happening at the time. I came home from jail again, my kids were in the system, it was just a lot going on, and she was like, listen, I know the people who wrote Prop 47, and they need somebody to talk about, you know, coming home from it, how it benefited, and she was like, you telling your story will shape what's going to happen for the rest of your life. And I'm like, what? You know, I didn't know what she was talking about, but she's one of those people that talks like that. And when she talks like that, she's saying something really profound, and it's really gonna happen. So, you know, I met Lenore and a few other people from California for Safety and Justice at the time. And, you know, she was like, just, you know, talk about how you came home from Prop 47 and, you know, what it did for you. And so what it did is it reunited me with my daughters at the time. I hadn't been out their lives for like at least 10 years. So because of Prop 47, I didn't miss a birthday. And also because of Prop 47, I was able to support my daughter in like the worst situation that she had been through. So, you know, passing these laws don't just let people go. It breaks generational curses. It provides support. It creates family reunification, safety. The list goes on. You know, we think that, yeah, these laws pass and it's so great and people are coming home. No, people's lives are changing, you know, and I am the example of that. A few months down the line, after doing like many press conferences around, you know, me coming home from Prop 47 and how I put my family together, inspiring people, you know, I ended up, you know, being employed by the same people who wrote the law. And it was like a full circle moment, because I was in county jail watching the clips from them advertising the law Prop 47. And I was laying in my bed, and I'm like, dang, if I could get out on that law, oh! And now I work for the people, you know, who passed that law once again. Full circle moment. But legislation that is impactful to communities that have little investment. It creates safety for people, because what it does is when a person can come home and their only thing that they have to worry about is finding a job, getting access to housing without barriers, being able to put their families together, they're not thinking about committing a crime. They're just not, you know. I've been out since 2015. It's 2023. It's as long as I've ever been home. And it's only because I stayed connected to community-based organizations. I fell in the safety net of people who opened their arms and again didn't, you know, criminalize what I had went through or what I had gone through, but instead ushered help around me. And so I stayed planted in that. People don't want to commit crime. People don't just wake up and be like, I just want to commit a crime. A lot of times people are hungry, they thirsty. Like, it is a human right to want to drink water, to want to go to work, and to want to have shelter. It's also a parental right for you to want to take care of your kids. And when you don't, and when we pass laws that create barriers for people being able to do that, that's not safety. Safety is when I could go to work, bring home a paycheck, pay my rent, and feed my kids. I feel safe. My kids is safe. I know nobody's harming them. I'm not thinking about nobody harming them, because guess what? I'm thinking about that overtime that I'm finna clock because I got another bill to pay. Like, that's what I'm thinking about. That's what we think about. We don't think about creating violence and inflicting that on people. We just want to be safe. And so when we pass these laws, you know, to let people go, and we also couple that with creating opportunities, you know, that links to the promise of somebody dream being realized, of them, you know, being in safe housing. having a good job, that's a career. Being able to have access to mental health services, being able to take their kid to a safe school, that is what creates safe communities. And when we get back to that, we could stop spending $187 billion on systems that lock you in a box and put your kid in a stranger's house. Woo! I hope y'all enjoying this if y'all screaming, because baby. It's fun. So Shakyra, what are your biggest takeaways from working with people with criminal records and advocating for and elevating policy changes?
So the biggest takeaway, what I'm gonna say is communities that are vulnerable, the communities that are most harmed and least helped. So what I've learned from that, and my biggest takeaway, is that access matters, acknowledgement matters. It's that investing and restoring matters. And, we know what works. There are best practice solutions that look like mental health, that look like trauma recovery, that look like reentry services, that look like community violence intervention. All of those things prevent crime from happening. But a humongous bulk of our public safety dollars are going towards the response to crime, not crime prevention. Because there's a direct line between, unaddressed trauma in contact with the justice system. There is a direct line to blocking people from the ability to have stability for themselves and their family. It is actually the way that we are currently talking about crime is really a result of undermining safety. Because if we really cared about public safety, if we were invested in anti-crime, what we would invest in is reentry, mental health, public health, community violence intervention, right? That's how we stop crime from happening. We are in this perpetual cycle of ignoring crisis and then just locking it away. It's literally running governments as if out of sight, out of mind, right? And that is through budgets, that is through public policy, that is through legislation. That's through practice. There are a lot of things that are in practice that have disparate negative impacts that are not even written down. Two people had a meeting, they decided they were going to handle this one thing this way, but you can't find it written down anywhere. But it's a practice that everyone follows. And it undermines public safety, it undermines family, it undermines well-being, and it undermines humanity as a whole. So that's what I would say about that. So, Ingrid.
One more. Okay. Explore tough on crime politics of the past.
Tough on crime politics of the past is creeping up again in our present. It's misguided. It's not tough on crime. It's really tough on vulnerable communities. And I'll talk about why that is. A lot of the justification for our, criminal penalty system is supposed to be in service of victims of crime. Well, we work with victims of crime all across the country. And I'll share a little bit about what the real experience is for victims of crime. There are victims of crime who are never connected with services, who are never referred to or get access to mental health support. They are victims of crime who are prevented from accessing victims' compensation. They are victims of crime who are never made aware that victims' compensation exists. They are victims of crime who are having to host GoFundMes to bury their children because they're not able to access it or are unaware of services that should be available to them. They are victims of crime who have waited 6 years and still have not heard back from a detective about the case involving their child who was a victim of homicide. There are entire cities that have untested rape kits that have been sitting around for decades. My city was one of those. There are entire communities that are very well aware that if their child or their family member is missing, that there will be no response or no coverage. There are victims of crime who are now mobility challenged, who are unable to access services because they're prevented from accessing. There are victims of crime that have a very short window of time to apply for support, but because they are in the thralls of PTSD and everything that comes with that, which could be, I cannot leave my home, I cannot get in a vehicle, I cannot sleep, I cannot get out of my bed, which are very normal responses to trauma, they're not able to access services. I'll tell you, as someone who has been a victim of crime, that oftentimes folks in our communities are treated like we committed a crime.
Yeah.
That oftentimes we are only useful for the conviction of someone else. That my healing and recovery is not even a consideration because my humanity is not a consideration. So when we talk about tough on crime, what I say is the whole basis and the root of it is completely inaccurate. Because we are not even acknowledging and supporting the people who are most impacted by crime and supporting them in their healing. It's literally victims of crime throughout this country are a means to a conviction. That's it. So what mass incarceration and criminalization make communities less safe? What do you believe would be the solution that create safety for all? And with that is, this system has gotten so large that the truth is everybody's touched by it in some way, shape, or form, regardless of where you live, who you are, how you identify. Because we have made this system so large, everyone is impacted.
This is my favorite question because I've been impacted by this work my entire life. And I knew what the solutions were before I had a title. Because I could just walk outside my door and can say, this is what should happen instead of this happening, or this is what should be in my community instead of this. And so I'm the organizing director of a program called TimeDone, which is a program that is comprised of thousands of people who are living with an old record, who have been impacted by crime and violence, who have lived in unsafe communities, who have been impacted by mass incarceration. And what we do is kind of unorthodox because we feel as people who have been impacted, we know that the first question that we needed to be asked was, what do you need? And so the way we approach our membership is we do have a component of leadership development because we do believe that passing legislation, is the key to removing barriers in their community. But before we even were able to think about that ourselves, we needed services, support. So what we do is, we ask our members, what is it that you need? And we offer credit education, courses, because for some strange reason they think our communities, are not impacted by credit, or don't care about credit, or don't need to learn about credit, or anything of that nature, when in fact it is a lie, because we should know about all of that. We should know about redlining. We should know about why when we come home from jails and prisons, why we can't go to other neighborhoods and be safer, and why we gotta get out and keep going to the same neighborhoods over and over and over. We need to be educated about that, and credit goes hand in hand with all that, right? Education, home ownership, all of that. You know what I'm saying? Just because we committed a crime doesn't mean we don't dream. That don't mean our brains stop. You know what I'm saying? And so we believe in our members so much that we want your dreams to come alive. And so we talk about expungement. The first thing is that you want to clear your record. You want to get away from that box physically, and you want to get away from that box that you got to look at on that paper too. Because when you don't have a criminal record and your record has been cleared, you ain't have to check that box no more. You know what I'm saying? You are presenting yourself as one whole human being, your first and your last name, and not that felony conviction that is associated with your name because you checked that box. And so we advocate a lot for a record sealing. We just passed a law in California called Senate Bill 731, the most aggressive piece of legislation in this country, passed by people who came from, the worst neighborhoods in California. They thought we were, they thought we were throwaways, but we were seeds, baby. And so we were able to get this passed because we educated our people about the barriers that they face and why it's important that we pass these types of legislation. We want your record to get sealed. That's the only way that you don't have to face those records. Those barriers is that if your record is sealed, you have the opportunity. And so instead of it just being, we broaden the scope of people who are able to get expunged. So at first it was just, low level crimes. Now if you've been in prison, certain crimes can get expunged off of your record. You can literally walk away from that prison sentence and return back to, whatever it is that you ever wanted to ever do in your life and dream again. You don't have to, say, I'm formally incarcerated. You ain't none of that. You're not a returning citizen. You are a human being that made a mistake and it's over now. You know what I'm saying? Because the judge said it's a wrap, and it's a wrap. When I say it's a wrap, it's a wrap. And so, passing those type of laws, we feel like we're very solution-based, coupled with resources like credit, because after I clear my record, the sky is the limit, right? For me, after my record was clear, I bought a house, 5-bedroom, 3-bath. I come from South Central in the heart of the 60s, and I'm not shouting out nobody, but I'm just saying that's where I come from. And who'd have thought a little black girl like me, who faced all that trauma, is now living in the suburbs with all 6 of my kids. And I'm also doing work to save my community, so it's a blessing, but I'm also making sure my kids are safety. Legislation equals safety. You feel me? And so we passed expungement laws. We partner with people, that create tangible services to help our people rise out of, societal situations to where they're living, in what we call post-conviction poverty. Because when you come home from jails and prisons, you have to take these lower level jobs, and you're not able to take the job that you probably would have taken had you not have got that criminal record. And so you're cycled in poverty. You know what I'm saying? You can only rise so much. Now, when your record is clear, you're out of that post-conviction poverty phase, and you're now in a different, you're in a different pot, and you're able to swim, you're able to see, you know what I'm saying? You're able to see the sun, you're able to again dream. And a lot of times we talk about mass incarceration and all the crazy stuff, but we don't talk about people that dream. Like, we still dream, we still have dreams, and we want to create all of these solutions, pass laws. We want to do a lot of leadership development. We want to connect people with services, and we do all of this so you can have the opportunity to to dream again. Because that's all we want to do is for our dreams to be realized, because it's important to us that we get to follow our dreams so that we break these generational curses. Because it's not just about mass incarceration, it's about breaking curses. It's about making sure that we create safety nets for our family. It's changing the trajectory of what the future looks like, because the future is in our hands, not the hands of those people that sit in their white curly buildings. I'm sorry, but y'all got it wrong. And so we change the narrative, because they think that, again, we are a subset of people that are undeserving, that are supposed to live in impoverished areas. And so my job is to challenge the status quo. My job is to buy a house in a rich neighborhood with all my kids, you know what I'm saying, and wear my TimeDone shirt so it can be a conversation starter, so they can ask what I do, and I can say I free my people, and I'm over here doing it, all that. Because that's what people need to know. We are injecting hope and inspiration into our people, because every single day they are taking the hope out of us and making us think we are not deserving. So it is my job every single day to wake up and tell you that if nobody told you that you deserve it, you deserve it all, and we gonna come get it for you. What's your thoughts on solutions?
So I talked about that a little bit ago, right? Like, we know what the answers are. Systemically, we're not investing in that. And part of it is that we have hundreds of years back decided these people are not deserving, right? In order to get to safety, if that is truly the goal, safety looks like investing. At the end of the day, very simply, we get our return on investment, and our budgets reflect what we want to see grow. We have been prioritizing and investing in surveillance, criminalization, incarceration, so we lead the entire world in that. We could lead in supporting victims of crime. We could lead in having the best public health infrastructure. We could lead in being able to take someone from, having a negative contact with the system to becoming a positive, person who's viewed positively and views himself positively. So these solutions, we have them, right? That's what we work on every single day. At our organization, Californians for Safety and Justice, the Alliance for Safety and Justice, the majority of our staff are people who identify like Ingrid and I, either survivors or people with past convictions or both, right? So we are coming together to advocate around budgets, around legislation, because we are a public safety organization. We want safety too. And we understand what safety looks like and how we get there. So the solutions are exactly what we all know works. We just need to invest in it and prioritize and understand that everyone is deserving of it. That it shouldn't be a small segment of people who are able to access safety. I like the ability to go walk around outside. I like that. I want all children to be able to access a good educational system. No parent should have to bury a child. There are parents all across this country who are losing their children to overdoses. There are parents all over this country who are watching their children just diminish under the weight of the exclusions that come with the criminal conviction. There are parents who are left on their own to try to figure out how to help their children heal post-victimization and harm. We are leading entire communities to navigate these very difficult challenges by themselves. Our work is really tied to making sure that those barriers that prevent a parent from parenting or a provider from providing are removed. Our work is really centered around making sure that everyone who experiences harm is able to access the support they need to recover and be whole again. That's what the solutions look like. And they're rooted in, again, acknowledging collective humanity. We are happy to take any questions. I will just encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about our work to visit our organization, the Alliance for Safety and Justice, and Californians for Safety and Justice. You can look us up and learn more about our work, become a member, and join us in this effort to build what public safety should look like for all of us.
Also, I just want to add, if you're